So, President Palacio, thank you again so much for being here and supporting the conference that we just had here in Berlin, the Berlin International Economics Congress. Your lecture, I think, really inspired many of the participants here, and I'm grateful that we have the chance now to ask you a few questions in the context of an interview. The first question that I have for you is the following. In the 1960s, America went through a period whereby it assessed whether the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture should become the cultural identity of the United States. But ultimately, it was decided that as a nation of immigrants, so to speak, people should take pride in their national heritage. As the world becomes more globalized, will the world have to make a similar assessment as minority cultures are diminishing? And what would be the outcome of this? Do you see the world moving into a global melting pot where everyone is getting more and more similar? Or how can one maintain also the distinctive natures of different cultures in different countries?
Well, thank you very much for your invitation, for your kind invitation. It's always a privilege for me to be with you and talking about this important matter of the world. At least I see the need that we have to move in the direction of the integration of majorities and minorities, and these ethnically or racial or economical or religious difference has to be separated. Nevertheless, in South America, at least, we don't have that concept of nation integration. I don't think that our independence 200 years ago were enough to integrate all of the population in South America. And that's a work that we have to do. That's a job that the world have for this century, mainly for the South Americans. I would like to speak in their name and also to them about the job that we have to provoke this integration of South America to become a nation, a big and a large country. At least I see that that's a need. I don't see that we're doing everything is necessary to get that integration, but I think that we have to do it.
And maybe just as a follow-up question, there are different strategies available to the cultural diplomat in order to protect, let's say, local cultures. The French, as you know, actually have quotas on the radio to make sure that a certain percentage of the music is in French and only another percentage can be in other languages. That's a measure to protect, to actually block, let's say, the cultural imperialism of the U.S. What would be your suggestion? Should countries be concerned with protecting or blocking foreign influence? Should we try to encourage more interaction between cultures? What does one do when one has a situation where there's a majority culture, sometimes dominating and even destroying local cultures? Should certain measures be taken to help maybe protect microcultures or local cultures?
Well, many persons in the world were disagree with the Huntington position about the clash of civilizations. I am agree with him. I think that we are facing a clash of civilization. But I don't think that is the most important problem. I think that besides this class of civilization, we have to pay attention how the geopolitics are. And if we follow the geopolitics of the post-war or the post-Cold War norms and rules, globalization is going to be a failure. And if globalization fails, every country in the planet will fail. So we have to change geopolitics. We don't have a first world anymore because that was during the Cold War. But now we have the OECD countries. But these OECD countries are represented by three empires. And these three empires are US, European Union, and China. So when talking about nation branding, actually nation branding is how these empires may introduce and influence, make influences in these OECD countries and in the second world countries, which are the schizophrenic nations, facing part in the first world, part in the third world, part west, part western. So we have to subsidize that. We have to correct that geopolitics, and we should talk about fair play among nations. We should stop talking about inter-imperialistic relationship to talk an international relation. International relation is among 200 countries, 200 nations, and about 2,000 nationalities, if we're talking about different cultures, as Huntington is talking. So we have to face the problem of 200 nations and 2,000 nationalities. And that's a big job that we have. It's not as easy as follow the norms of US or European nation or China.
So I have a clarification question following up on that. Actually, if you said initially you agree with Huntington that we find ourselves in a situation where there's a clash of civilizations. Many of the critics of Huntington's have problems with the maps that he has in the beginning of his book. You may remember the first 20 pages of the book. He outlines a number of what he calls civilizations. He talks about Islamic civilization, where he groups together all the different interpretations of the Quran into one. He talks about Western civilization, where he groups together all those countries he considers Western into one. As we know, there are many interpretations of the Quran. So I think it doesn't seem to make sense to refer to Islamic civilization. By the same token, as we know, the West has also not always agreed, especially under the Bush administration, where there are many moments where they didn't agree, in many important moments. So I just want to follow up. When you say that you agree with Huntington about this clash of civilizations, what do you mean by that? Because I think this word civilization can be problematic sometimes, the way it groups together many peoples. So what did you mean when you said you agree with this clash of civilizations thesis?
Well, I think that the importance is that we have to respect the identities and the tradition of every civilization without trying to impose one over the other. So we have to respect that. And we have to assimilate the other culture without eliminating them. So we have to make them work. For example, in Latin America, we have our Aboriginal civilization, with the medical ancestries and ritual. Many of those medicines have become the medicine of the world. How do you cure malaria? With quinina. Where is the quinina coming from? From Peru and Ecuador. That's where the quinina comes from. And that's a contribution of science. We never asked for a patent. And the world was benefit from that. And there are so many others medicine. Recently, ayahuasca was patented by a transnational company from the United States. So we have to respect that culture. But we have to incorporate that knowledge to the scientific method. So we have to take that ancestral knowledge and to apply the scientific method to see if that works or not. So then we'll put two civilizations together and not clash of civilization. But I think it's a mistake to reduce the problem to that problem now. The problem mainly is geopolitics. And the geopolitics is that we're dominated by three empires. And we cannot allow them to do that because globalization without norms is going to be a failure. It's simple.
Thank you very much. My colleague also has
Many potentially world-changing events are currently taking place. The Western world is trying to pull itself out of the financial crisis. Revolution and reform is taking place across Northern Africa with hopes of a democratic future. And the effects of climate change are becoming more apparent with the recent tsunami in Japan. What effect will these have on sculpting the direction the international community will take in years to come?
Let me see. How is the future of the world with the current industrialization that the world is what is happening in the world today, and how this is going to benefit the problems that the planet is facing? Is that the question?
I believe it has to do with in what way will the international community respond to global threats, which are of course coming from different directions, but will be that it will bond the international community more, or will it maybe split up countries even more because they have to care about their own problems?
Yeah, I think that we have to make goals, common goals. And before taking care about what disagreements different countries may have, we have to look for what make us to be in the same side and to fight together against that. And my proposal is to have the first thing is life. Not to fight anything else, but to fight life, for life. And that is a proposal that can make it easier for the countries to get together in only one direction. Still, you may have disagreement. Still, you may have different ways to approach it. But at least you may get agreement in what not to do. There is a principle in medicine. That principle is medicine's first, not to harm. Primero, no dañar. Primum non nocere. And that's one international principle, I think. In the first place, we have to do whatever is necessary to preserve life. For example, in Ecuador, we have some very vast area in the Amazonic jungle. It's about 10,000 square kilometers. Its name is Yasuni. You have a variety of life there, fauna, flora. In any other place in the world you have that. But also you have a very, very large reserve of oil there. If we exploit that oil, then Ecuador will be rich, like Saudi Arabia. But we're going to harm the planet. We're going to produce more than half a million tons of CO2. And that is going to contribute to the warming of the earth. So we have to take those aims, and the aim should be life. We should not allow the transnational companies to patent medicines. We should fight against wars. We should ask the leaders of the world to stop these stupid plans of wars. Today we have another war. We have to stop producing armaments. We're spending $1.5 trillion in armaments. And we're saying that people is dying because they need medical attention, which is true. What is democracy we're talking about? What is the ideology? What is better, capitalism, Marxism? No, they don't care even to democracy. They don't care. They need economical success, and that's it. Nobody who's going to be alive, who's going to be dead. And that we have to stop it. And that is what I want to transmit to the world, mainly to the third world countries. We have to wake up and we have to say, stop the war, let's produce life, and that will be the first proposal. It's very difficult to oppose to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
South America had economic and social strife early in the last decade. However, many South American economies are booming. Brazil is becoming an economic powerhouse, and also many countries are benefiting from foreign direct investment from, for example, China and other states. South America has even been tipped to have the power the United States currently has. With all of this activity, most of which is, of course, positive, what challenges do you perceive in the future, and how will South American countries overcome these challenges?
Yes. Thank you very much. This is a very good question. And there is only one way, doing research, being the owner of the knowledge, being the owner of the reality, and we are not. So saying that Brazil is coming up is a fallacy. That's not true. And I'm going to tell you why it's not true. I'm going to repeat something that I said in the forum. And I want to repeat these numbers because I want the young people to remember it very well. the world, the planet is moving toward the knowledge and the scientists are doing in that direction. So how much money a country or a region is investing in making research, scientific research, and becoming the owner of that knowledge, that's the most important part of the story. 38% of what the world invest in being the owner of the knowledge, or in research, in scientific research, 38% comes from United States and Canada. 28% comes from Europe. 14% comes from Japan. And the rest comes from the rest. And the rest mainly is China. And the rest of the rest is for the rest of the rest. How much South America is investing in knowledge? How much? Is 1.6% of the world that invests in knowledge. And we're 400 million persons there. 400 million persons. This corresponds about to 0.6% of the GDP, of the Latin American GDP. 0.6%. Only Brazil is the only country that is investing more than 1% of its GDP. The rest of the country are below the unity, is 1 point something. And that is the reality. So you can say very easily, who is the owner of the future? Is going to be South America, is going to be Brazil. Brazil is spending only 1% of their GDP. And the whole South America is producing less than 0.6% of their GDP in knowledge and in research. But Europe is investing 28%, and United States and Canada 38%. Who is going to be the owner of the future? Let's tell the truth. Let's do not lie to ourselves. That is the truth. So that has to change. How do you have to change that? I think we need make investments in research in what is more important to us. What is more important to us? Life. What is the name of the science that study life? Biology. So we have to take money and go to the third world and say, here is the money, and investigate the research in life. Who are going to do that investigations? Universities of the poor countries. Where the money, from where they are going to get that money? From the budget of the weapons. You know, not the money of not the funds of the United Nations, not the funds of the World Health Organization, because they have very little money when you compare that what the world is spending in weapons. So we have to stop producing weapons and to take that money and to produce investigation in biology in those countries, and then you will see that you have medication for the poor without the need to pay that astronomical cost that the poor has to pay to save their lives.
You are very active in promoting universal health insurance. Of course, it is up to each country to implement its own policies in this regard. Recently, many Americans were outraged at having to purchase health insurance, citing the fact that they have never been sick, needed it in the past, and the government has no right to interfere with their lives in this regard. Why do you feel it is essential that healthcare or health insurance be universal, given the reasons that we've just stated?
Well, you know that then I have to take some difference even in the Western world, in the Western Hemisphere. You know, Europe and the United States has different origins of their own democracies. You know, United States, the main aim in the United States, of the democracy of the United States, was the fundamental individual rights, liberties, and freedom, but individual ones. So they try to stimulate the progression of the individual. That individual doesn't need an universal insurance. That's why 40 to 50 million persons in the United States do not have life insurance, because they are starting their origin, the democratic origin of them is different. They are talking only about individual freedom. When you come to Europe, the thing is different. Europe, without being communist, have a more social origin of its democracy. And one example is the Beverage Plan that I'm pretty sure you're familiar with. Winston Churchill started the Beverage Plan after the Second World War. And the Beverage Plan was supposed to give medical attention to everybody. Medical attention and medicines to everybody. It was after the Second World War. Now, you have to make some registration through your job and through some other things. Obviously, the Beverage Plan has been superated already. As their failure has decreased, has increased, but mainly in Europe, you have a very social inspiration for the attention of the people, because we are talking about the community. United States has the virtue of the individual freedom, which is a virtue, but that becomes a vicious when it's too individualized that they don't have universal health insurance. In South America, we're suffering a more sad problem, because we don't know about the social problem, we don't know about the individual freedom. What we know is that we don't have enough money. So we created a social security, and that social security is only to the people who have a job. But the job, people with a job is only 10% of the population. So only 10% of the population have an insurance. And when you were adding health, which is a right, it's a right, but nevertheless, we became a privilege. First of all, Social Security was the privilege for the worker, the muscle who had to work, 10% of the population, nobody else. Obviously, the checking account of the rich person is a Social Security to pay attention to their health. Nevertheless, what happens with the other people? Then we had to think, what about the militaries? The militaries who fight in the wars. We have to create a social insurance for them. And then to the policemen, and then a social security for them. So we were increasing, and we became 20 to 25% with the 5% of private insurance. So we have 25% having really explicitly saying, I am protecting you about those diseases. We believe in South America that we put a hospital in the corner of that street, and that is making health care, no matter if you are well equipped or not. But the poor guy go over there, and they don't have the medication, and they don't have the medical instruments, and they don't take care of them, because there is not an explicit right, a social an insurance, which explicitly says, I'm going to protect you about appendicitis. It means that they are not protect you about the eye diseases or the skin diseases, but you are increasing that. Initially, you protect 3 diseases, then next year 5 diseases, and next year you are going to 10 diseases, and then you increase to 12 diseases, but you are going to make it explicitly. In the meantime, you keep the old-fashioned attention that we have in South America, but we have to move toward a universal health insurance, which explicitly says which diseases is going to be protected, because we're not able to protect catastrophic diseases. What happens to a family in Ecuador if the poor father of that family have a myocardial infarction and needs a heart surgery? What happened of the boy that just bought a motorcycle, had an accident in the motor, and has a multiple injury, and has to spend 3 months in the hospital, who is going to pay for that? Because that's not free. Somebody has to pay for that. It's not free. You may not charge that person, but if you don't charge that person, someone has to pay for that. So you better separate some money in some places, and you call it that insurance, health insurance, universal health insurance, because you have the money to cover that, even the catastrophic diseases. A normal delivery could be normal, but a complicated delivery of a lady could be very costly. Who's going to pay for that? A diabetic person has to spend insulin 3-4 bottles in a month. Who's going to pay for that? What happens if one day she does a diabetic coma and has to spend 15 days in the hospital? Who's going to pay for that? That's catastrophic medicine, and we don't take care of that. So we need universal health insurance.
Well, thank you very much for your insights and your perspectives. It was a pleasure again to have you here at the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, and we thank you very much for the time for the interview. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.